Hello.
Vicki, can we start? Or are you still letting people in?
Nope, you can start.
Hello.
Vicki, can we start?
Yes.
Or are you still letting people in?
Nope, you can start.
Hello, everyone. My name is Taiwan Proper,
Vicki, can we start?
and I am the director of Philadelphia Black Deaf Advocates. I want to thank everyone for joining tonight to meet and learn about our guest speaker. And her name is Mayra Castro.
And this is my sign name. Hi, everybody. Hello, hello, hello.
Now, I want to thank the Disability Pride Philadelphia and Sign of the Times for sponsoring this event today. Thank you, everyone. I want to thank Vicki. And please hold your questions until the end. Now, you are able to type your questions in the chat box, or if you have questions, you want to put them in the chat box, or you have the option of raising your hand. It is your choice. And also, I know this is your first time attending a webinar in Zoom, and it is a learning experience for everyone. Be patient, and it's a new experience. So let's begin and welcome Mayra Castro. Yes, welcome.
Thank you, Taiwan. Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here this evening. I want to thank Vicki and Rita and Jackie and Taiwan, who was our moderator this evening. You guys are a great team, and I'm very happy to be with you this evening.
Yes, yes.
So Taiwan, you have some questions for me, I understand. Take your time.
Yes. I wanted to know, where did you grow up? Did you grow up in America or Cuba? I want to know where you're from. I'm very curious.
So hi again. I'm glad to see so many people in our audience this evening. Let me share with you a little bit about my background. My name is Mayra Castro. This is my sign name. I was born here in the United States, and I was born in Jersey City, New Jersey. I was not born in Cuba. I'm a first generation born in this country, born deaf. My family is hearing. The town that I grew up in was Union City, New Jersey, which has a very large Hispanic community. And at that time, there were numerous Cuban individuals moving to Union City. Many of them were immigrants, obviously. Many of them flew over, and this was probably back in the 60s.
Oh, thank you. Now, I want to know, what year did your parents come to America? When did they arrive? Exactly which year?
So let me tell you about my mom and dad. That'll help you understand who I am and be familiar with my experiences growing up. Mom and dad were hearing, born in Cuba. My father was born in Havana. Mom was born in Las Cruces, which was the eastern part of Cuba. They got married in Cuba. Mom has 6 sisters and brothers, a very large family.
Wow.
This is before communism had set in Cuba. So, you know, they were having a good life. A large family, everyone got together often. They had a farm. My mom was a seamstress. She did many different things. I noticed in my culture that seamstress and sewing was very popular, and also schooling. And they had a great life in Cuba until communists set in. So before that, Mom and Dad decided that they wanted to go to New York, and I think that was around 1960. They arrived in New York, and then they moved to New Jersey.
Oh, wow.
So
Big family. Very interesting. Now, I'm just curious. Did your parents, when they came to America from Cuba, what language did they speak?
when Mom and Dad came to New York, and then they moved to New Jersey, where I actually grew up, they came to this country because they believed that they wanted their children. My oldest brother and then my sister were also born in Cuba, but I was born in this country. So my brother and sister were like 2 and 3, I think, when they came to this country. My parents wanted them to have an opportunity to have a better education, and they felt that that would happen here in this country, a better life, have freedom. Mom and Dad didn't want to have any of their children living in a communist country. And again, this was like around 1959. They didn't want them to have to suffer. They wanted them to be able to experience freedom, a good education. And then some aunts and uncles also relocated to America. So we had an extended family here in this country also, and we were all living together. And Mom and Dad wanted us all to have a very fruitful life in America.
You have a strong family connection. Wow. Now, I wanted to know, where did you go to school in college? Were you with other Latinos that were deaf at school and college? I'm just wondering, when you were here in America, where did you attend school?
Well, let me just take a step back for a moment. Mom and Dad spoke Spanish. Mom believed only Spanish should be spoken in the home. So that's what we did. All my brothers and sisters can speak Spanish, so they're bilingual. They do Spanish and English. So their second language is really English, and Spanish or Cuban is their first language. So we would communicate at home using Spanish. My brothers who knew English would help translate for me in English, because I grew up orally. So they were kind of like my first interpreter, shall we say. There were some communication barriers with my parents because they were only speaking Spanish, and I wasn't able to understand the language fully because I'm not fluent in Spanish. And obviously, since I don't hear, I wasn't able to hear the Spanish language. So there was a lot of gesturing that was used at home as our language. Mom and Dad really did their best to try to communicate with me. They never gave up. They were very persistent. And they were great role models for me. I really did learn a lot from them, and they were very devoted to me because I was the last child, I was deaf, and I became deaf because I had German measles, which would have been like 1962 to 67 was the high incidence of mothers who were pregnant having rubella. So there was a struggle communicating with me because obviously I couldn't hear. I didn't speak Spanish. So my brothers and sisters, as I said, were really my first interpreters. And they were very instrumental in making sure that I had communication at home. And they really never gave up. They were very persistent in making sure that I was part of the family and understood what was going on.
Very good. It seems that you were able to communicate with your family orally as well as signing. Wow.
Yeah, if I can just for a moment talk about my school background also.
Okay.
My brothers and sisters, well, we lived nearby a school. We lived nearby a public school, but it wasn't a school that had a program for the deaf, and there were no interpreters. So I was actually placed in a public school when I was around 5. And I was starting to deteriorate with my language. My language was not developing the way it should. I was having difficulty speaking. I was isolated. I was lonely. So my mom and dad went on a search to find a school that I would be happier as a child in. Because I really looked up to my brothers and sisters as role models also. They were awesome to me. They have huge hearts. They were very kind. And as I said, they really tried to make communication accessible for me, even though there were barriers at time. And I remember the school that I was placed in, I was not progressing positively. I was actually declining. So mom and dad, as I said, contacted, they were looking for another school for me. They were looking for resources for me as a deaf child. Could I get transferred to another school that had a program for the deaf, other deaf children, an oral school, a signing school? And my mom and dad were thrilled when everything worked out and I was transferred to an oral school. So I did grow up orally. That school, most of the kids were white at that time. And we're talking like 1970s. So it was mostly white students. There was no diversity in the schools. Latinos or Hispanics, maybe 1 or 2 here and there. But I was not surrounded by individuals of my own culture and background. The teachers were white. I really didn't have any Hispanic role models to look up to. We might have been similar in age on some levels. We were all in a contained classroom, but it was a strong oral program. And they believed that speaking was better instead of signing. And the school actually forbade having sign language. Much different than what we see today, where we see more signing in schools for deaf children compared to my time. You know, whether it's PSE, total communication, ASL. When I grew up, it was signing exact English. That's what I was exposed to. On some levels, it did help me with my reading and writing, even though I did struggle with it. I had many challenges with literacy. I was probably only at a 2nd or 3rd grade reading level. Again, because I wasn't able to communicate effectively all the time in my home situation, I needed to improve my reading and writing skills, and that was a huge struggle for me. Middle school or junior high school, I had an interpreter for the first time, my first experience. I knew not what is this interpreter that they had placed with me. It was very awkward. There were some deaf students that were mainstreamed with me, and I was a little bothered, well, maybe embarrassed, because, you know, the hearing kids would pick on us. They would be bullies sometimes. And I lost my motivation in school, and my grades started to deteriorate. I started getting D's. I just was not motivated. I didn't care. My attitude was bad. And then I went on to high school. And then I started to change, because now I was in a signing environment. It was a total communication environment. So I started picking up sign language. You know, there's pros and cons to a mainstream school environment. Some of my old friends from the oral school transferred to the high school that I was in. So it was nice to see those peers, my friends, in school with me. But in mainstream schooling, I was the only deaf student in, say, some of my classes. I wasn't in a purely deaf class unto itself. But I think overall I did well, and I did good enough, shall we say, in high school to get by. I graduated in 1985. There were not many Latino students in the high school that I graduated at that time. So I really didn't have a sense of identity in high school. And honestly, my exposure to my identity and my culture came from my family. But I really wasn't developing my own sense of identity. And I did have an attitude problem, to be quite honest. But again, there were not many Latino students in high school. I don't know where they were. So I did graduate in 1985. I went to college in Rochester to NTID. I'm sure everyone is familiar with the National Technical Institute for the Deaf. And I was overcome with shock. I did, you know, my college experience, it was a life-altering experience for me. First of all, I'm away from home. I'm living in a dorm. I'm away from my family. And I'm used to seeing my family every day, and now I'm not. And now I'm trying to build a life out of college, trying to learn to socialize with people I don't know, learn American Sign Language. Because now we're talking about, I'm almost 20. I was a late bloomer for learning sign language. I needed to get some language acquisition happening so I could be equal to my peers. There were deaf teachers. I'd never seen a deaf teacher before until I went into college. I was like, wow, you're deaf? Really? And you sign? It was an amazing experience for me. So I started to pick up ASL. They were very encouraging to me because I was not a native user of the language. So I learned a lot from my peers, and I really learned a lot from my professors. And I started to learn and understand what ASL is about. And that's when I really started to improve my literacy ability.
Wow. To think you grew up and went through high school, an oral program, and then you didn't have any sign language exposure until you went to college at RIT, and finally you saw so many people signing. Oh, what an experience. You have had an amazing story. Oh, you inspire me so much. Okay. Now, who were your role models? Did you have role models in school or in college? And I want to ask you, who was your role model?
Well, you know, as I said, I went to NTID. I left after 2 years because my father had passed away. And I was just heartbroken. I was a daddy's girl. You know how us last babies are in the family, right? We get to be daddy's girl. So then I thought, well, I'll go to Gallaudet. At Gallaudet, it was an amazing experience also. I really fell in love with the university. It really changed my life, made me a better person. And it was a big challenge for me at the same time, because now I'm at a university level.
Yes.
I mean, it's the only liberal arts college for the deaf in this country. And deaf people come from all over to be there. And they're signing morning, noon, and night, no hearing aids. Take those hearing aids out.
Really?
No voices. It was signing all the way. Every day, morning, noon, and night. So my language really excelled, especially my literacy ability at Gallaudet also. Talking about role models, I want to talk about organizations for a moment. I had to figure out like what organization I wanted to be a member of, what met my expectations as a student at that time. And they had a Hispanic organization at Gallaudet, which was, as you can imagine, thrilling for me. So I immediately signed up to be a member. And that organization, I was a little bit taken back and overwhelmed of all the different Hispanic cultures, Colombian, Mexican, you name it, they were there. And I thought, wow, we are family. We have a huge connection. We share experiences, language, culture, and values. There are so many similarities about us. So I participated in the organization, and I was quite active in the organization. Whether it was a conference, a community event, I met my first real role model there, John Lopez. John is Mexican and a tremendous leader, tremendous advocate, tremendous activist. And he encouraged me to fly to Texas, to San Antonio.
Yes.
And I went to a conference there, and it was called the Hispanic Experience. Give me 1 second so I make sure I have the correct name, because it's been a while. So they talked about individuality. And John said, you know what, you got to go, Mayra. And I'm like, I'm shaking in my boots. I said, nah, I don't think so. And he said, and you should be a panelist. I was like, a panelist? I don't have any kind of experience. I mean, I worked for a brief time in between NTID and Gallaudet, but I didn't have any experience going to a conference, being on a panel, all that stuff. But what an outstanding experience it was for me, both personally and professionally. That really was probably my initiation, shall we say, of discovering me and my identity and getting a sense of Cuban culture, Hispanic culture. Because I think I missed some things growing up, even though my family was great about exposing me to many different cultural items. But I'm not sure, because I couldn't hear, if I got the full exposure to our culture. So I went back home and I was telling my mom about what I did. Oh my God, I went to this conference. I learned about our culture. I was trying to, because mom didn't sign. So I brought her a book, to help her learn how to sign. But she was so oriented into Spanish and speaking Spanish, it was really challenging for her to try to learn American Sign Language, especially full sentences. She would know certain words, and that would help us to communicate. But I had said to my mom, you know what, I really didn't know anything about Cuban culture. And I was learning it while at Gallaudet on a day-by-day basis.
An amazing story. It seemed like you had finally found your identity and who you were in Gallaudet. And I mean, you navigated your way as you grew up. You went to RIT. You were a little lost, but you found your way. And I mean, your experience is so rich of what you have been through. It is awesome. And now here you are, quite a role model and a successful role model at that. Yes. Now, I wanted to know, who is the role model that influenced you the most? You know, who was the one that was important to you in your life as you look back?
Remember I mentioned John Lopez, Taiwan? He was
Yes.
actually my first role model as an adult. And he will always have a special place in my heart. He opened my mind and my heart. He talked to me about giving workshops and presentations, talking to parents, having an opportunity to influence deaf Hispanic children, whether they're from Colombia or Venezuela or Cuba, that deaf Hispanic children today need to have role models like myself and other Hispanic individuals. That they need to be connected to their family, to their school, to their community. And he said, don't give up. So I want to see these kids develop positively like I did and develop their leadership skills and give back to their communities and also have a positive educational experience and go on to post-secondary education. I don't want these kids to be ignored.
That's so true.
And I don't like that word can't. We need to be much more positive. Yeah, we know they can't hear. Their mom and dad know they can't hear. But they need to meet deaf adults, deaf role models. There needs to be more outreach to our Hispanic deaf children so that they can feel connected and included and begin to develop leadership.
Definitely. That is the most important. You know, I agree with you totally. Now, I want to know, what kind of jobs, positions do you have now?
Well, I graduated in Gallaudet in 97. I majored in psychology. The reason I majored in psychology, my eldest brother has a mental illness. And I remember growing up seeing the struggles that he was going through. He's my big brother. I know how he struggled with his mental illness. I didn't really understand the word schizophrenia when I was younger. No one really could explain it to me. I really didn't understand the diagnoses. I understood a little bit of it, but I really didn't understand it on any deep level. I didn't understand his behavior. I didn't understand things that I would see. And my family didn't really talk deeply about my brother's diagnosis. So when I went to Gallaudet, I thought, you know what? I'm going to study psychology because my brother. I love my brother. He has a huge part of my heart, as do the rest of my family members. And psychology is a very broad discipline. But I was fascinated with the mental health component of psychology. I was fascinated to learn there were support groups out there. There were papers and articles being written in it. I was surprised that I had many colleagues and friends at Gallaudet who had a family member that had schizophrenia or another type of mental illness.
Interesting.
And I noticed that many of these people were very willing to talk about their experiences having a sibling or a family member, and they weren't embarrassed to talk about it. But there were some people who were embarrassed. So I kind of sat on the sidelines for a while. I didn't say anything. I did ask my brother, because I had to give a presentation in class. I said, do you mind if I talk about my experiences growing up with you? And we had to do a paper. I think they said it had to be like 50 pages. And then we had to do a brief summary, a stand-up lecture about the paper that we wore. So I talked to my brother and he said, yeah, absolutely, you can talk about it. So I did. So I worked in the human services field in a variety of disciplines: family therapy, children with emotional behaviors, deaf adults, group therapy. And all of those experiences impacted me tremendously because my brother was always on my shoulder like an angel, guiding me into the direction that I was going for employment. And I was working obviously with deaf consumers. I'd have meetings with the psychiatrist or the psychologist. I wanted to be able to see improvement with the clients because they would have direct communication with a therapist who could sign. And always the goal is to create stability for your clients. And it was great because, you know, the clients that I was working with who had various mental health diagnoses had someone that knew sign language just like them. They weren't getting treated disrespectfully or falling through the cracks. So that was a big part of my life and my career, my profession for several years. I worked in the alcohol and drug addiction field back in 2011. I did that for a while. I was pretty burned out from that, I must admit. Very burned out from that. And then I went into what I'm currently doing, which is directing Camp Soul for the Deaf.
Now, I wanted to know about the schizophrenia. You know,
I know it's a big word, right? It's a cha word. S-C-H. S-C-H, I'm going to spell it wrong, I know. Z-O-Y-P-N-R-E-N-I-A, something like that.
okay.
And this is the sign for it, yes.
Thank you. And also, I noticed the sign. I want to know what was that sign that you used?
So I was in the field of drug and alcohol counseling.
Thank you. I wanted to make sure I could understand your signs because I didn't know. Okay, so thank you. You have a lot of experience in a lot of different positions.
Currently, I'm operating Camp Soul for the Deaf.
Oh, okay.
But I also did some language support for children that were 0 to 5 years of age. And we were doing that remotely and virtually.
Wow.
But of course, I have to be working with deaf people, children, young adults, because language access is so critical for these kids. So working with these kids 0 to 5 was an awesome experience.
You are showing that you are really caring by working with the children and doing what you do. Thank you. Now, I would like to know about the Cuban and Hispanic culture. You know, what's important? Can you share about the culture, the food, the music, or the family?
So I grew up with a lot of family get-togethers, especially on the weekends. Everybody would take turns hosting an event in New Jersey or New York. I mean, we lived very close to Brooklyn and Queens, so we were constantly crossing the border to be with other family members. Communicating with family was hard. I think I missed out on some things. But when the family got together, it was all about the food. Food in all capital letters. You know, talking with the family. You know, I had cousins that I would play with who were, you know, similar in age. My third brother, we were just 2 years apart. So we were, you know, tied at the hip, like Tom and Jerry. So we all played together. We would maybe play dominoes, you know, visual games. The music, oh my God.
Yes.
Love me some Hispanic music. Give me some salsa, and I will dance the night away. My parents were very encouraging about me learning about our family and culture. I wasn't isolated, you know, staying at home. I was very fortunate. But again, you know, communication was a little weak because, you know, I was the only deaf person in the family.
Oh, I love your culture. The food is delicious. Oh, and definitely the
Oh,
dancing.
yeah. Oh,
Definitely
yeah.
music, popular, doing the salsa, all of it. I love it. Now, I want to know, what cultural traditions did your parents share with you?
So traditions, Sawan. The food, without a doubt. Food is very powerful in our culture. My mom believed that passing down the food from my grandmother. My grandparents were from Spain and they moved to Cuba. My grandfather owned a restaurant, a cafe, just a small cafe. I think they only served breakfast and lunch and some liquor. Strong on festivals, celebrating happiness,
I like that.
celebrating happiness. When my parents came to America, my mother had kept the tradition of teaching me how to cook, not only to me, but to other family members. And so food is very powerful in our culture. And every Sunday, we would be together as a family. There was no excuse for missing Sunday dinner. And we would eat arroz, which is yellow rice, with polo, which is chicken. And that was a typical Sunday meal for us. But I learned so much about food and how to cook it from my mom. She was an awesome cook for all the years that she lived on earth. She was never like, I don't feel like cooking today. That was not her style. And then I started keeping the tradition of her recipes and cooking them. My mom passed away 2 years ago. I miss her dearly. She had a very full life, a wonderful, wonderful life. It would be hard to put into words how wonderful my mother was. I think she was the heart and soul to our family. I think my brothers and sisters would agree with that. She worked very hard. She was a factory worker. She supported her family, her children. There wasn't anything that she wouldn't do for us. We were her center of attention. So those things that she taught me as far as food is concerned, I definitely want to share with other people I know.
Well, you definitely have strong family ties and you have to cherish it. And you just keep those traditions going. I know your mother was a beautiful person. And I mean, that food would be awesome. I would love to come over for dinner.
And especially some of my close friends have told me what a good cook I am. So unfortunately, right now, I do not have so much socializing with friends because of our current world situation, but I do have many great friends that I've spent many wonderful times with.
Oh, yes, I agree. The same thing is happening in my family. Black culture, we have our traditions. It's the same and it's so important. But I want to thank you for sharing. Wow, I am totally inspired by your experience. Now, I know you've been a community activist for many years. And I want to know, what are you most proud of for being a community activist?
Wow, that's a long list. Let me just do a time check. We're going to go back to Gallaudet for a moment. Gallaudet gave me an opportunity to be inclusive. It taught me what leadership meant. It taught me that I have abilities and potential. It taught me to follow my heart. It taught me not to take too many detours, to stay on the path. And that's why I feel so strongly about being involved with deaf Hispanic children and the community. That first conference that I went to, that helped me to improve my personal and professional growth. Being able to be among individuals who were professionals in the field for many years, who came from all over the country to that first conference that I went to. And I've gone to several conferences after that because I wanted to be able to grasp and gain knowledge from other individuals and also develop my educational opportunities and my leadership skills. The community, there's so many things that you can say about community. Setting up a Latino organization, setting up a workshop, family events, community events. There's many things that individuals can do out there to improve community and the quality of their life. And that doesn't mean, and that's for any race, any creed, any color. It's important that other individuals, white individuals, learn about our culture and become allies. And we need to become allies. We need to bridge that gap. All these different experiences that I've had for the last 20 years to where I started to where I am today from that one conference has been amazing.
Oh, that is good. No wonder you have such a reputation. Wow, because you've been doing quite a few wonderful things. Now, I think I'm going to stop and allow the audience to ask questions.
There was one other question that I wanted to address, if you wouldn't mind, Taiwan, about deaf children. If you don't mind, if I talk a little bit about that. Question number 12.
Now, I know you are very involved with deaf Hispanic children, okay? And I want to know, as you've been involved, what are you most concerned about for the deaf Hispanic children?
I would say there are 3 items. I think inclusion is very important. Inclusion of Hispanic deaf children. Being connected to their school, their community, and their parents. I think that's very, very critical that we have those connections, that we have resources that we can share. When I was in school, there were no resources. My parents didn't have anything. They had no guiding principles about how to raise a deaf child. So we need to make those connections to the deaf Hispanic children in our communities to make sure they get the resources that they need to develop a good quality of life, develop literacy skills and leadership skills. Of course, I'm concerned about deaf Hispanic children. You know, my experiences growing up at times were frustrating, painful. I had language issues, language deprivation, inequality of language. Many of our Hispanic deaf children are language delayed. They're not experiencing top-notch quality education. They're behind the 8 ball. Many of them only have white teachers. We need to get out there and find more teachers of color and diverse backgrounds. And we need to be having a dialogue with one another. We want our deaf Hispanic children to see other individuals that look like them. We want to raise the bar of education, raise the bar for them. We want to stop being superficial and say, all right, well, you know what? This is good enough. You're good enough. You're only going to read on a 3rd grade level? Okay. No, that's not the way it should be. We don't want to see deaf Hispanic children or any deaf child being language deprived, culture deprived. We want them to meet higher expectations. We need to knock on the doors of those schools and tell them it's time to step up your game. Good enough is not good enough anymore. And don't give up. And we have to get on the Board of Educations and say to them, don't give up. We need to cooperate with one another. Open your minds and open your hearts.
And I definitely agree with what you're saying. And I wanted to add something there. Some questions in the chat box, I believe. Let me see.
And one other, yes, if I want to just introduce or discuss a couple of other items that are on our list, Tawan.
Sure. What advice can you share about being deaf and Hispanic? What do you want to share?
Ooh, I have a couple of things on my tips that I want to share and put out there on the table to everyone. Educators, administrators, counselors, social workers, parents, community members, friends, whoever you are. Number one, let's get some role models. Let's get our deaf kids meeting role models of diversity. Not just those who are white, but deaf role models, again, who are diverse. And they also should be meeting the parents. Also in the community. After kids are done school, they go home. And poor mom and dad, they don't know how to be involved. We need to have ASL classes for their parents. Talk about deaf culture, deaf Hispanic culture. Whether you're from Cuba or Colombia, it doesn't matter. You can combine your culture that you grew up with and deaf culture and have it become a beautiful thing so that your children can be successful educationally and personally and be able to sign. Start signing with your children when they're younger, from the minute they're born.
Yes, I agree.
So they can be like us, Tawan. They can develop good personal, interpersonal, and leadership skills. They can become advocates.
Love you. Thank you so much. I'm thanking you as well. You are a very good person. And I want to mention that you are a wonderful woman that's involved. And I've noticed that, about you. You are an awesome person. And I cherish you. I heart you. I love you. And I would love to have some food and some dance and some of your culture. Oh, thank you for sharing this with us. There is one person that has a question in the chat box. Okay, so let me see. Just give me a moment to take a look. Thank you. I'm looking now. Okay. Can you see me? All right. Now, hello. My name is Patrick. And I learned recently that some people do not like the label diversity because it seems too contrived, too forced. Would it be better to aim for inclusivity instead of diversity to ensure everyone can participate instead of, the quota? Yes, diversity.
So you're saying, Patrick, that you're not loving the word diversity. You like the word inclusivity more. Could you repeat that question?
I want to go slow. Hold on a second. Now, recently I learned that some people do not like the label diversity because it seems too contrived and it's too forced. Now, would it be better to aim for inclusivity instead of diversity?
Oh, okay. I got you.
Okay.
Let me give you a response, or maybe I'm asking a question with a question. I like the word diversity, and I've seen this sign used for it. Just learned it, meaning like the spectrum, the gamut, as opposed to doing the old sign. I mean, the old sign diversity came from talking about equality and equitable. And again, as I said, I do like diversity because I believe in equity and equality for everyone. In our society currently, I think diversity still is applicable. I think we still need to talk about diversity. And we all know that this sign for Indian is not a politically correct sign for those who are actually Native Americans.
Okay.
I'm sure you guys probably know the history of the Native Americans and things that happened to them over the years.
Yes.
Asian people, brown people, African American individuals, Hispanic individuals. I'm still seeing that word diversity. So am I ready to throw it out yet? Not so much.
Thank you. Let me check the chat box and see if we have any more questions for you. Just give me a moment. Let me see. Well, I think one person asked a question. Maybe we have time for another question, or maybe you can add some more to your experience and share it with us. Wait a minute. One just person just responded. And let me see. And Patrick said, thank you. I learned a lot from you.
Thanks, Patrick. I hope so. I hope I hope the information was beneficial for everyone, actually.
Very good. You have 5 more minutes. If you want to add something that's worth it for the audience, for us to, for us to learn from you, you're more than welcome to share.
I do. Just a couple of words about deaf Hispanic children. And I do want to reference again about there are not enough resources out there. Whether you're talking about a residential school or a mainstream program, not enough role models, deaf counselors, deaf teachers, We need to have more of those. We need the opportunity to see that, whether it's on YouTube, virtually, or live in person. I'm concerned about Hispanic parents. They're not currently involved in their children's life. I've gone around, oh, I forgot to tell you about the camp, Camp Soul of the Deaf, which was founded in 2016. And the reason we founded this camp, it's not just a Hispanic camp, it's also for Black deaf children also, because many of them do suffer from language deprivation, cultural deprivation, and they themselves do not have enough role models, even in 2020. So it's very frustrating. So I thought, well, let's set up a camp in the summer. I'm hoping that we'll be taking some workshops, presenting some workshops during the fall and the winter months, because I want deaf Hispanic children, Black deaf children to see that there is a world out there for them, because 90% of the parents who can hear do not ever learn how to sign with their children. Many of these kids are mainstreamed. They're put in oral programs. They're not put in programs that focus on sign language. They're put in programs that focus on auditory information only. And they're, very strong on criticizing deaf kids who are not successful learning oral language. So I really want to see Hispanic parents, Black parents get very involved with their school, with their social workers, with their counselors. I would love them to be taking ASL classes, even if it's just once a week, maybe on the weekends. Having ASL mentors, there's an ASL mentorship program in New Jersey, and it is really wonderful. And them having an opportunity for the kids and their parents to attend workshops. We've been providing in Spanish interpretation services for many of the events that we've been offering.
It's awesome.
Because parents need to be able to have an opportunity to benefit from resources that are out there. I mean, many parents culturally are embarrassed because they have a child that's deaf, has a disability, and we don't want that. We want that negativity to stop. We want parents to be able to throw away their negativity and look at their child as a holistic person who just happens to have a hearing loss.
Well, I want to thank you. I would love to stay and ask more questions because your experience is so rich and it's so wonderful to listen. And I'm sure the audience has enjoyed listening to your experiences, and I've enjoyed it. I want to thank everyone for watching Mayra, and I want to thank the interpreters for voice, and thank you so much. And thank you, Vicki. I enjoyed being here and a part of this event. And leave your contacts. Thank you. Everyone have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming out, everyone, tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.